Hello economics students, in this video we're going to look at how we actually calculate the rate of inflation. Remember, now you're able to take a calculator into your SAC and into your exam, so this should be much easier for you than it was in the past. All you need to do is remember the formula, take the information, the data from your SAC or exam, punch it into your calculator and you'll be absolutely fine. Before we get started, remember that the inflation rate is really just calculating the growth in the CPI. Okay, in the consumer price index. So, first of all, if we're calculating the growth in anything, we can use the same formula, which is we take the data at the end of the period and we minus it from the data at the start of the period, and then we divide it by data at the start of the period. We did the same formula to calculate the growth in real GDP. It's just when we're calculating the inflation rate, we're looking at the change in CPI. So we do the CPI at the end minus CPI at the start. And what that really tells us is what was the change in the CPI index number. To express it as a percentage, we then divide it by CPI at the start, times it by 100, and we get our inflation rate. And that's exactly what the ABS does. So let's use a simple example to get started. We have CPI in the quarter 1 of 100 and CPI in quarter 2 of 102. And our job is to calculate the, quarterly inflation rate. So we start off with 102 minus 100, which is the change in the CPI between period 1 and 2, and that gives us 2. We can see that, right? From 100 to 102, CPI has increased by 2. But to express this as a percentage, we divide it by the CPI at the start, times it by 100, and your calculator will tell you that is 2%. The inflation rate over this period here was 2%, or in other words, the CPI index grew by 2%. Okay, let's look at another example. You can see here that the CPI has actually decreased from quarter 1 to quarter 2. We can still use the same formula to calculate the rate of change or the growth rate. So we're going to start out with CPI at the end of the period, 90, minus CPI at the start of the period, 100, and this will give us negative 10. And again, all that's telling us is that over the period, CPI decreased by 10 index points, or negative 10. So to express this as a percentage, we divide it by CPI at the start, which is 100, start of the period, times it by 100, and our calculator will tell us that this is negative 10%. In other words, the inflation rate is negative 10%, or the deflation rate is 10%. Okay, now that is the simple calculation of inflation, but let's just check. I want to show you that I'm doing the right thing here, because if I go back to the data from the ABS, which is the latest release of inflation from the ABS, we said that the CPI growth was, or the ABS said, the CPI growth was 1.4%. Now remember that to calculate the growth in the CPI, we just have to look at the CPI index, and that is here. So if we were to calculate the change from December 2022 to March 2023, the rate of change, that would give us the inflation rate. Let's just double check. So we go 132 CPI at the end of the period minus 130 CPI at the start of the period, and we divide it by 130 CPI at the start of the period, times it by 100, and that will give you 1.4%, which is exactly how the ABS calculated the March inflation rate. And there it is right there, but you double check at home. Okay, bye for now.